What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the PokerNews podcast. It is the post-WSOP 2019 PokerNews podcast, which is absolutely a gigantic miracle. I can't believe we made it through.
We have made it to the end of the 2019 World Series of Poker. You are in Houston. I'm in Vegas, but not at the Rio for the first time in a long time. Feels weird. Feels empty.
Yeah. Feel like, I miss you, definitely. There's definitely that. And what's up, Russell? Welcome to the broadcast. So we got a lot of action to cover, of course. We last left you with 3 left in the main event, and a lot of things did end up going the way we discussed. Some things did not. Ultimately, Jeff's prediction that Hussein Ensan would win is obviously correct, but...
Yep. And I changed predictions like every single day until that final day, but nailed it on the final day. Just absolutely nailed it.
We did have some super interesting stuff go down. There was several hands where Alex Livingston was the chip leader. There was a little bit of time where Dario Sammartino was the chip leader. We did talk about that potentially the day wouldn't go as easy for Hussein Ensan as it had gone in the prior few days. And that, my friends, was actually pretty spot on. I think there was definitely some moments where people thought he might actually lose this one.
Yeah, I mean, we said the entire time, really throughout the course of the whole final table, look out for Dario Sammartino if Dario Sammartino is able to get some chips. And before Dario was able to get some chips, Alex Livingston got some chips. And Livingston even became chip leader at one point. I thought he continued to play really, really well. He was a guy who I was super impressed with on night 2 of the final table. He kept that up, and he was just rolling. It was a smooth ride for him when they started three-handed play. And once his chip stack started to go down, Dario Sammartino's chip stack started to go up. And by the time Livingston was eliminated, Dario had over 100 bigs. He took the chip lead at one point, and we were in for it. Were you setting up? Were you locking in for a heads-up battle for the ages like last year?
I didn't think it would go like last year, mostly because I anticipated some fireworks from my boy Dario, because I got to be serious with you, and I hope that for the viewers watching at home, that he gave the type of show that I predicted. I didn't get to see, as we've spoken about, a lot of the hands go down because it's very different to watch live. For those who are watching it from home, just know you're not missing anything live. Like, it's way worse and way harder. But I did see some of that action where I could listen to some of the commentary, and I listened to a couple of hands where Dario's just making, like, the sickest calls. Like, sometimes he is just such an incredible player post-flop that he's able to pick off bluffs. He's able to make all kinds of calls with, like, middle pair, bottom pair. I definitely think he didn't say this, but I definitely think he clearly had got some tells, as we spoke about on both Alex and on Ensan rather, and he was utilizing them. But when we talked to Dario, and also when we talked to Ensan, and Ensan was incredibly gracious in his interview in saying that it very easily could have been Dario's, and what a great player he is, and the same for Livingston. But he just said, Dario was card dead, heads up completely, and Dario echoed that sentiment. I didn't see that, so I don't know for sure. Is that what it looked like to you?
I think worse than being card dead would be what Dario was, where he always had a semblance of a hand and was just always a little bit outpicked. And a heads up, that's tough when you make a pair. It's a lot harder to do heads up than 9-handed. So, like, Dario would have a pair of 4s on, like, a king jack 8-4 deuce board and just couldn't get away. Or Dario on that same board would have 8-7, but Ensan would have queen 8 or queen, not whatever the pair was, I already forgot, but, like, Ensan would have the better kicker. It's just like every little edge went to Ensan throughout the course of the evening. Now, you're right, you said it, Dario played amazing poker from three-handed to heads up. Made a big call on Alex Livingston on the river with just king high. I mean, that's just what he was doing. It's like it seemed like he was locked in. He was in the zone, and it was just set up. The cards just went the wrong way for Dario. So it's not like he wasn't seeing hands. He was seeing hands. They were just always a little bit worse than Hossein Ensan's hands. And credit to Ensan, too, because I really feel like in certain spots, Ensan did a good job later on in the heads-up match of getting pretty good value out of his hands, out of those third pairs, fourth pairs, etc. And that's really important in a big heads-up match because they really didn't play until the hand that many big hands. Like I'm looking at the PokerNews infographic now, which is the line graph of their chip stack, and Dario at one point had a pretty decent lead, and then you see Ensan just kind of barely moving, just barely climbing his way back. It was a real methodical climb to where he had separated himself from Dario by a decent amount. Dario's down to like 40 or 50-ish bigs, and then they get the chips in, and Ensan wins the World Series of Poker main event. So all the credit in the world to Ensan. You know, he just took it to Dario. He got a little lucky because Dario always seemed to have something. It's just a little something worse.
It's interesting because like I mentioned, I can not think of very many final tables where the chip leader also coming into the final table ends up being the winner. I think Joe McKeon is an example of that, but I'm trying to think of another main event final table where that ultimately was the way that it went, and I think it's really a huge testament to his skill to be able to maintain a chip lead like that for as many days in a row as he did against such formidable opponents. And speaking of, I think it's important to mention and talk a little bit about Alex Livingston. His bust out interview, I was really excited to talk to him. I hadn't really got to talk to him thus far in the tournament, and his interview, I mean, he speaks like he plays. He was very fast in his answers, incredibly astute and articulate, and he basically said as much as so many things that I think we had kind of assumed about him or guessed about him, that he said, you know, I don't really want to play live poker anymore because it's boring and everyone tanks, and I don't like the hoodies and the sunglasses and all this stuff. You know, you can tell he's a really cerebral person who needs to have some kind of, you know, activity and stimulation to be engaged and involved. And he said, you know, I'll keep playing the main event. I love playing the main event, but really, like, outside of that, I find poker to be just exceptionally boring or live poker specifically, but that he totally gave credit actually to Kevin Moss. He said everyone's giving him hell, but actually that he said for a non-professional poker player, this must be just a totally wild experience. And so then I said, so are you a professional poker player? Or, you know, like, how are you?
What's the deal? I've been talking about you for 4 days and I have no idea.
Yeah. And he said he plays online a lot, and that he has two side hustles, basically. Okay. He has a house in some beautiful part of Canada. He was wearing a shirt from that area of the country, or the area of his country, and that he rents out that. And then he had another business. Oh man, I hate myself that I can't remember it now. Who has two side businesses? I don't remember, but basically he seemed pretty busy with that, and I'm relatively sure that, you know, a good percentage of the proceeds will go into whatever his next adventure or endeavor plans on being. And really, I mean, these pay jumps are so crazy. But that being said, I think at the very end, when I spoke to Dario, I think he wouldn't have cared at all about the money. Like, you could just see his heart was so broken, so broken. And it's interesting. It makes me think, like, for someone who's been around poker, you know, as long as he is and as long as he has, it really speaks a lot to how important the main event is, what this thing is for us in our industry.
I think so too. That was so cool to see because, you know, Dario had an absolutely stacked rail, as Ensan did. Ensan had all the German high rollers showed up, but Dario had like Liberi and Igor Kurganov, Ryan Reese in the Super Dario shirt, et cetera, and you could tell immediately afterwards that he was so just hurt by it all. Like it really, this tournament really had an impact on him. It's an understatement to say he really, really wanted to win. And think about it from Dario's perspective. When that final table was a grind for him. He really never saw hands. He was always the short stack, it seemed, until like late in three-handed play. I mean, he worked and worked and worked to get that opportunity that he had in heads-up play. And somebody said in the chat, let me see, Russell said Dario looked exhausted. Don't think he would have played that hand being 100%. I disagree. I think that's a spot that Dario just takes all the time. I'm talking about the last hand when Dario flopped a flush draw and then turned a gut shot straight draw as well. A good spot to shove. He gets Ensan to fold a lot of hands. Pocket King's not being one of those hands, but it's,
But the range of hands he's folding there is so huge.
He's folding out a lot. And even when he does get called, he's still alive. He still has a ton of outs. He just was not able to hit. And he said it, and I know he talked to you also, but he said it to Kara as well on the broadcast. He's like, he was real pragmatic enough to say that, like, I'm really upset right now. I know I'll be super happy tomorrow. Basically saying it's $6 million, and that's super nice. But, like, I'm really upset. I'm really emotional right now because he wanted to win, and like you could see it in his eyes. He carries his heart on his sleeve, so to speak. And so, when he was upset with himself, you could see it. Heads up, there was a spot where he set things up. He called with just jack high and no outs on the turn, clearly to set up a river bluff. And once Ensan checked on the river, Dario thought, and then just checked back and kind of gave up. And Ensan showed king high. Like, the bluff would have worked, the setup worked and everything. And you could tell Dario was really upset with himself, but he always could get himself back into that mode. I thought he played outstanding poker, maybe the best poker out of anybody at that final table. Ensan's up there, Livingston is up there as well. I was impressed with Dario. I thought he was just a ton of fun to watch. A very emotional player. He dressed up all three nights. How about that? I think the poker community was rallying around him. There was no loser here. I think I tweeted this afterwards. Like, Livingston, Sammartino, Ensan, they all represented poker really, really well on its final night.
And after speaking to the guys, Alex Livingston basically said Dario's like a brother to me, but all these people, all the guys at the final table will be friends. And we spoke to Dario about that afterwards as well, because we've seen some final tables where there is this sort of camaraderie or there is this connection. I think the table with John Hess, Scott Blumstein, there was clearly a connection and a camaraderie. There have been other tables, I think, not so much. It's a group of poker players all doing what they do. But Dario said, this is an experience that very few people can understand or relate to. And so having gone through this specific experience, this specific one that we just did, these 9 people, we're all going to be connected, as friends in some way because we share this experience that really no one else can understand. And Dario said even more so the final 3 guys that, this is really a shared experience. But it's so interesting because as shared as the experience is, it's also completely different, right? The end experience is so different that it has to, I think, in some ways sort of taint or color the rest of the experience as well.
It's a fascinating dynamic when you get down to three-handed in the World Series of Poker main event when each one of these players has a legitimate shot at the first place prize of $10 million and at becoming, our game's world champion. And it means a lot, and you could tell it meant a lot to the players. But to your point, it's like they were all rooting for each other in a sense. Like, they all kind of had each other's backs. We had this one moment, which I guess could lead to kind of our next point of conversation, because I'm curious with you being there throughout, where Dario was stuck with a really tough decision. Ensan's rail was going nuts as the rails were going nuts.
Oh my gosh, the rails were
hand.
driving me insane.
And so Ensan was like, guys, like, this is clearly an important decision. Let's keep it down a little bit so Dario can think. That just kind of showed you the relationship that they had. They all really, really respected each other. They were all really happy for each other, etc. So tell me about the rails, because that was like a point of contention on Twitter. I thought from a broadcast perspective it looked great, because I'm always thinking about like the casual poker fan or the guy or girl who randomly turns on ESPN, and I thought it was so much fun to see just the rails just go absolutely ham at every single point, throughout the hand or before the hand or after the hand. So it was cool on TV. How did it come across live?
Yeah, live it was super annoying. Annoying. It basically, and to be fair, I've completely been this person, so I get it. And maybe now that I can't drink, I'm less sympathetic. But it definitely seemed as the night wore on and people got more and more intoxicated, it just got a little bit tiresome. And while I completely understand and agree that there's... we want to get more people in poker, and if they want like a soccer match or whatever, if that's what brings people to poker, fine, I'm totally willing to accept it. But the poker is also a really, it's a cerebral game. It's a game that I think requires a lot of attention and a lot of thought and a lot of, especially in these types of situations with the cameras and the lights, and the breaks are not normal. These are not like the normal take your 20-minute break and go chill out and decompress, and it's just a lot of tension. And I thought that I actually found that there was quite a few spots where I thought it was mildly inappropriate for like how loud it was for what was actually happening. But that being said, most of the people who are on the rails most of the time are not poker players or not big poker players, and maybe they really don't even understand the gravity of every decision or the potential equity in every moment or hand happening. So I thought, wow, and this is interesting. Tony said it was annoying to players on other tables too, and this is something I did consider. Also, there was all these other poker tournaments going on with final tables of bracelet events.
But in that case, I'm like, I'm sorry, it's the main event. Like all other poker tournaments have to take a back seat. And I get that, in the minds of the players who are playing those other tournaments, they want to have full concentration. This goes back to what we've talked about, that the main event should always be like the last tournament standing, which it eventually was later in the evening. But like on the last day, I think it should just be the final three, and I think that the main event takes priority. I thought that in a way it was fair because both rails were equally doing it. So both players had to kind of fight through that, so to speak. I also think that in the case where a player wanted his rail to stop, like I mentioned earlier with Ensan, that they would stop. And if a player were to go over to his rail and be like, guys, let's just cool it a little bit, then they would have stopped. Dario at one point went up to his rail, and so we all thought when watching the broadcast, like, okay, he finally told his rail, like, guys, this is just a little too much, blah, blah, blah. And then Kara comes on with the sideline report, and she's like, he actually said that Ensan's rail was going super crazy, and his rail needed to step it up a little bit. And so they did go even more insane. And so I really like the back and forth. I can see how it kind of weighs on your mind when it's such an important tournament. Therefore, every decision is just super, super, super important. Yeah. And you have all these people yelling, but I kind of thought it was a cool added dynamic considering it was the same for both players. Yeah. Well, and I will say I have two sort of points on this. One, when Dario got his double up the very first, was it the second day? I'm trying to remember. It was basically like, oh no, the third. You got one on the second day, one on the first day, and then one on the third day. Like if Dario, maybe it's the third. I think Gary. The ace jack against sixes. I remember, like basically it was like if Dario gets chips here, the whole tournament might change. We'll see. Yeah. And I actually thought it was the last night.
I think it was the last night, actually. I think it was when they were three-handed. But anyways, he, like, runs to his rail after he gets it, and his knees, like, bust out the TV. You know, they have all the, like, you know, branding. And yes, and it just smashed it right up, which I was like, that is, like, pure joy, right? Like, just total joy when you just, like, don't care. And they, like, ended up putting a flag over it. But I thought it was... What I thought was super interesting in looking at how the rails ended up panning out. I did have a moment where Liv Bory came over. I was talking to her on the second night, and she, of course, being with PokerStars, knows Gary Gates really well. And she was like, ugh, like, this is, like, such a weird spot because I could really be on either people's rail. But, of course, like, I'm better friends with Dario, so I'm going to have to go on Dario's. But it was interesting, like, to see so many of the German pros, for example, on the rail of Hussein Ensan. And I was thinking what an interesting sort of... that there's, like, a real national sort of pull to the whole experience, because most of these players, I know I see them on the circuit, I know they're better friends with Dario than they are Ensan. I know that they travel the circuit with Dario. I know they go out to dinner with Dario. Like, there was several of the German contingent that I would have immediately assumed was going to be on Dario's rail, who ultimately were on Ensan's rail, which made me really curious about, was there some relationship there that I just didn't see, or is it really just that, like, this represents something for Germany for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I still am not sure, because we know that most of the time these German high rollers have pieces of each other in tournaments like this, but Ensan doesn't really seem like this is the first time I've ever seen Ensan hang out with, you know, Stefan Sontheimer, for example. Now, granted, I didn't know who Ensan was before the main event, so I might just not have noticed it. But Ensan won on a satellite, so maybe he sold some off to some guys. It also seems like Ensan just might be rich, and so he didn't need to sell anything off. So in that case, was it like a German pride type thing? I mean, Dietrich Fast, that dude was going bonkers on the rail. I mean, he went absolutely insane. So I would have assumed that he had some sort of piece, but maybe just the German pride takes over. And and the alcohol certainly weighs in a little bit. But to see all those guys on his rail was a bit of a surprise to me. Dario's rail makes more sense, like you mentioned. He had his Italian crew, but he also had the poker players crew, like Liv, like Igor, Ryan Reese, et cetera, et cetera. He had a lot of just his colleagues, so to speak, show up to back him up. And I mean, credit to them, and credit, I keep going back to Dario showing all this emotion. Every time he doubled up, like you said, that on night 3, when he doubled up with Ace-Jack against Ensan sixes, he had like 20 outs going into the river, and he spiked one of those outs, and both he and his rail went insane, and I think it made for fantastic television. Dario was so happy, like it looked like he won the damn tournament, which was awesome. That was so cool to see his passion for this specific tournament, because we've seen Dario, go deep in a lot of prestigious events, and we've seen, some emotion here and there, but we haven't seen anything close to what it was final table of the main.
I will say that there's always some chants that stick out at every rail and that will remain in my mind into perpetuity. I remember Pius Heinz, who really, there's no need for me to remember that, I guess, but like it was like Pius Heinz, Pius Heinz, Pius Heinz, P. And then we have, I mean, there were so many, like Reese the Beast, Phil Collins. It was like, I can feel
that was a great one.
There's just been some good ones. Like, I'd love to do maybe a video comparing all these chants, but I have to say Dario's rail had, hands down, just a million zillion amazing chants that we were trying to figure out what they were actually saying. Like, I'm sure it's in Italian, but we thought maybe they were saying like pizza supendario, or like something like pasta supendario, and like there, honestly, I don't know. I have no idea what anyone was saying, but I will say they had some gems. For sure.
I don't even know if it was the German rail or the Italian rail, but there was definitely a pizza chant, just a pizza, like at one point when everybody, I think, was just delirious or so, a couple hours in the heads up. Props to the rail for being able to keep up the energy for that long. Wow. And also props to the rail at the end, because At the end you had Ensan win, and his rail was going nuts, and Dario went to his rail, and of course he was super sad, and you could see the emotion all over him. But his rail was like awesome around him, and then Ensan's rail started chanting Dario, it's just like cool. It's like everybody comes together in that moment, and I thought that was really, really a great moment for poker.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so funny because it's like we spoke about in the beginning. Every single final table has always been this way for me for the main event, where you start with these 9 players that you may or may not know some things about some of them or care a little bit about any of them, and without fail, no matter what, by the end, your heart is totally connected with some of them. You feel like you know some of them. You know their rails. You know their stories. Like to me, it really is great TV. It's entertainment, and it's like human stories, the hero's journey or something like that.
Yeah, and you had, I feel like it caught on pretty well from a mainstream perspective. Of course, it helps being on ESPN from like, I don't know what it was, 6 Pacific time to 2 in the morning or something. Just go straight through. So everybody who's turned into ESPN, watching their nightly Sports Center or Baseball Tonight or whatever it is, they're like, what's this? And, they probably see the rails going crazy. It helped them stick around. Rich Eisen, big-time sports broadcaster from the NFL Network, has his own radio show as well. He was talking about the rails. He was watching it every single night. I just think that the atmosphere around the main event final table could not have hurt bringing in more viewers.
I have to agree, and even I was just at a meeting this morning, and several people who clearly know nothing about poker were talking about watching it this weekend.
Perfect example.
Yeah. My husband was making me watch it, and I was like, wow, that makes me happy, and I'm sure that everyone went and like burned Las Vegas down. I'm not sure. Hussein was saying that he was tired, and he's like an old man and he's tired, but I'm pretty sure that Dario, the way that Dario and his rail left the Amazon room, it seemed like they were going out to have a night.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure Dario wouldn't have minded not doing that, but they were chanting his name.
They were dragging him, I'm sure. It looked like Igor Kurganov was the main one giving him a pep talk afterwards. Like you couldn't hear anything. They had either turned his mic off or the rail noise was too loud from Ensan's rail. But you could tell Igor was like almost like you just finished 2nd place in the World Series of Poker main event. How great of an accomplishment is this? By the way, you also won $6 million, and let's go party. It was something like that.
Yes,
it was a real pick me up for Dario.
I think it was interesting, too, to see when we came into the final table where it was something like 4 Europeans, right, and 4 Americans and a Canadian, or I can't remember exactly how it spread out, but it was like pretty spread out. I think like recognized people from all over the world, which I think makes it kind of dynamic and interesting and fun. And yeah, I hope there was a lot of talk on Twitter. I think a lot of people did ultimately become fans of one person or the other, and I saw a tweet when I was flying home that I thought was super funny from why can't I remember his name? Why is this happening right now? But oh my gosh, the French guy, the handsome French guy who was the main event final tableist last year. Why is this happening? Oh, I hate that this is happening. I can see his face so good. Anyways, regardless, he basically tweeted, if all of the DMs and such that I got last year from girls looking for, especially American girls looking to date, is any indication of what's going on right now on Dario's phone, Dario should just get a new phone. Like, shut that thing off, buddy, because you're about to get hammered. And I thought that was funny. And even like D Moon Girl, like I think she was saying like, oh gosh, like seeing this queen on the river.
Benjamin Pollock?
Yes, Ben Pollock.
Yeah, okay.
I knew. I was like, it begins with a B. I couldn't remember. It always kills me because he looks so American to me, but he's French. But he always wears like a Yankees hat and stuff. It just throws me all off. But Ben Pollock and D Moon Girl was talking about just like having such a sweat when she didn't expect to have such a sweat, and I really feel like this ended up being a lot of the storylines really worked and really like captured people.
And I've said this throughout the last couple days, but this final table I felt like attached to because I really did feel like I liked everybody except for Moz. But like Milos playing to win, Timothy Sue playing to win, Nick Marchington, the kid who carried himself very well despite a couple of like poker blow-ups. Like I thought he was great. Zen Kai was a ton of fun to watch. Moz, pass. Gary Gates, could not have handled himself better at the end of this poker tournament. Just a super classy approach, just super appreciative of his rail. It was amazing. Livingston played so well, played quickly, was a nice refreshing change of pace. At Dario we've talked about, Ensan we've talked about. Like I feel like I just liked all of these guys. And if you would have handed me this list of 9 players going into the World Series of Poker main event, I would have kind of looked at it and been like, we got Dario there, I guess, but overall this isn't that great. But now afterwards, I'm like, this was a great World Series of Poker main event final table, and it was the best overall that I can remember for quite some time.
Agreed. And I have to commend I think that this must be part of the production of the whole thing from ESPN. I think we've talked about that from a timing perspective, but the breaking it up over 3 days, it really does give you this, it changes the whole experience so much, I think, for as a viewer, giving you that time to really sort of fall in love with these people and, give it, for whatever reason, instead of just breaking it down into one, the breaking it up into 3 days really changes the sweat you have, I think, for each of these guys.
I agree. I think it's just so reasonable to watch for a couple hours a night, as we build to. Now, of course, the last night is usually going to be pretty long, but that's fine. If you're going to have one long night, have it be the last night where you're actually playing down to a champion. If every night was 8 hours, I think that'd be a little much. But I think it is absolutely perfect from the production side of things, like how they set this up, how they schedule it. I think it makes for very entertaining viewing throughout the course of 3 nights when, keep in mind, we've already been watching World Series of Poker main event coverage for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And they were still able to kind of keep us honed in.
Yes, and I really liked, even from what I was able to see, I never really got the audio linked up with the images, but I was able to see some of the sit-down interviews that they had set up with the guys, and I loved the way that they made it look. I think, I don't watch a lot of professional sports, but I have to imagine that this must have been mimicking or paralleling the way that they interview guys in professional sports, like deep in events or something, because it just looked great, and I think I saw a few moments of some of those interviews that it seemed like they really got some stories and some emotions from the players, which when you can get, especially when we talk poker faces and we talk about what people's experience is like watching someone play poker, to be able to get those backstories, to be able to get those emotions. And I also think part of the way that they're able to get that is by spreading this out over the course of several days and making these players exhausted, like so exhausted, and so emotional. I only saw this like part where Dario was talking about like playing on his bed with his sister and his dad, like after his granddad died or something, and he was like, you could tell he was tearing up, and I was just like, oh, sweet baby, like you can come cry on my shoulder anytime. I got you, baby.
Yeah, I think to go back to what Pollock said, I think Dario's going to be all right.
Yeah,
moving forward,
I think he'll
with
get
the ladies.
through.
I think he'll be okay. I think he was probably doing just fine before that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that couldn't have hurt.
And it's interesting, when I spoke to him after, I know that he had mentioned this before, and it's been obvious for those of us who are traveling the circuit, he hasn't been traveling the circuit as much as he used to. And the fact that he realized, and he said that he doesn't enjoy poker as much when he plays it all the time, that he wanted to spend more time with his family and his friends, and that made him appreciate poker all the much more. And that for him to come, we were talking about Dario long before the main event. He had a great summer. He had multiple final tables. He was playing incredibly, and so I do think this is something we talk about a lot, but being able to pull back from poker does seem to quite frequently actually improve people's game.
Yeah, I think so. You do hear that all the time looking back on it. Like guys who just, they keep their focus on poker, so to speak. They just kind of enhance their other life priorities, and it helps them get a really good head on your shoulders. It's very easy to burn out at poker, especially at the highest levels when you're playing for that kind of money. it can be really intense. And when you do that day after day after day and travel here and travel there, don't take any time off to kind of enjoy where you're at, but you're just playing and playing and playing, I'm sure it can just wear on you. And so it can be refreshing when you take a little step back and you can go into a World Series of Poker kind of recharged and amped up and ready to go.
Yeah, not to be so haggard. Well, I had a feeling we weren't going to get away with skipping over this, but Gigi says, what about the commentary controversy? First Nick Shulman and then Jamie K not doing the heads up, which I actually didn't realize Jamie didn't do the heads up.
I think, Jamie was there for the heads up, I'm pretty sure. The Nick Shulman thing, I really, to my best understanding, I do think it was just a simple misunderstanding. Like from day 5 onwards, the commentary team was going to be Lon McCarron and Norman Chad and Jamie Kerstetter, and that message was somehow not sent to Nick, and so Nick thought it was more like he got yanked at the last second. Again, I believe that Nick was scheduled through day 4. He worked through day 4. It had nothing to do, this I know for a fact, it had nothing to do with Nick saying, don't watch the main event if you want to, get better at poker. 0% to do with that, just kind of a scheduling miscommunication of sorts. And again, I think it was Lon, Norman, and Jamie throughout basically the entire thing once day 5 hit.
And Jeff would know because Jeff is in the inner circle.
On the inside. On the inside, I got my people.
And we're guessing because they thought that he wanted to play the 100K and other things.
Yeah, and they probably scheduled him so he could play the 100K high roller, and he's probably glad he did because he finished 3rd, and that's a nice little paycheck there.
You mean he's not making that big money commentating?
Yeah.
That's not where the big money is?
Commentary money is a milli.
And I have to say, I was loving Jamie. As I've mentioned a million times, wasn't really able to watch all the coverage, but I was able to listen to a lot of it. And for me, she was explaining what she was talking about so well that even without seeing what was going on, I was able to really get a grasp of a lot of spots and a lot of situations that were going on. And it's funny because there's always this talk about whether or not it's too much or I guess I shouldn't say always. I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of conversation. When Antonio Esfandiari really started to do the commentary, there was a lot of talk about his ability to speak to people who don't really understand poker and also those that do. And I'd have to say, for me, listening to Jamie, I really loved it. But if I didn't know about poker, I'm not sure, it would have been a struggle for sure, I think. Yeah, it's a lot about poker. You have to know about poker, I think.
Right. And I think that's why they have both Jamie and Norman Chad and Lon McCarron, of course, doing the play-by-play, so they can kind of cover all angles. They can cover your basic angle, and they can cover your more advanced angle. But a decent example is Rich Eisen, who I mentioned earlier, who's not that big of a poker player or usually that big of a poker fan, but he raved about Jamie. He thought she was perfect as far as her analysis and explanations were concerned. So I think that's kind of the demographic that you're looking to hit throughout this final table broadcast, and I think that she did.
What I really appreciated about her commentary is there are so many moments that I think can very easily go unnoticed if someone doesn't really explain them. Many marginal spots and sort of just relatively innocuous hands going down, where when she's explaining how crafty or how almost poetic what's happening is, you're like, oh, I totally see it now. Yes, this person is a genius. Where if maybe someone isn't pointing it out, it's pretty easy to overlook. I think a lot of spots in poker. It's such a nuanced game that it can go not noticed, basically.
Yeah, and that's why that analyst role, the color commentator role, whatever you want to call it, is so difficult, because you have to explain so many parts of, like you said, such a complicated game. So to be able to do that, major props to Jamie.
And how exhausting. I mean, I think about just even what I am doing periodically and being in front of the camera and having to be super conscious of every word you say and everything you say, because everyone will pull everything out of context. And to be able to do that for so many days in a row, especially in that analyst role, I was super impressed. And I mean, she doesn't have that much experience, right? Like, I was like, wow, she just like nailed it.
I'm pretty sure this is her second year on the main event at all. And so that kind of shows you the confidence that the producers have in her to put her, boom, like, okay, you did 1 or 2 days for us last year. We think you're good enough. Like, let's ride out the whole main event with you.
Hell yes.
And so that's a huge tell, so to speak. And like, I know some people give Norm a hard time, but like, I laugh at everything Norm has to say. I think that maybe the casual viewer does as well. I mean, he's just having a good time. He's not pretending to know something that he doesn't. Like, he leaves kind of the hardcore poker talk to Jamie. With that said, he has like studied the game, so he's come along as far as learning what's new in No Limit Texas Hold'em tournaments. And maybe. I just don't know. I still appreciate Norm's sense of humor, even though it is kind of the same thing. I just like love him playing that old
He's
kind
so polarizing.
Guy.
People either love him or hate him.
Right, exactly.
That's great also, I think. And, you know, what I did get to see, so I was close enough to the break desk to get to see a lot of the talk and the hand analysis from the break desks. And one thing that I did notice, actually, which I don't know if this has always been going on. Of course, I generally don't get to see the live coverage, but, like, there was definitely a little friction between Maria Ho and Phil Hellmuth.
Well, I mean...
like, Maria was just like, you're annoying, basically, is the vibe I was getting from her.
Yeah, so let me say, I think Kara and Maria were absolutely fantastic throughout the break desk. I mean, Kara's a host that I'm sure, you know, me and you certainly admire for what she does. She was great, and Maria was spectacular in that analyst role. And Phil comes on, and I like Phil, and I think he did a good job. But every point, like, Maria would start talking, and then, you know, they'd have a solo shot on Maria, and you'd see this kind of finger come into her, you know, her camera shot, like, he's like, I've got something to say, I've got something to say, I've got something to say. And Maria's like, well, do I finish my point, or do I let you jump in? And eventually she's like, yes, Phil. And Phil's like, blah, 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 you know, like, it's just...
And he had already, every time, had his own. Like, he has his own point, and then it comes to Maria, and she says, well, I'm going to have to disagree here because of X, Y, Z. And then it's like, but I'm not done yet.
Yeah. He's like, well, actually, and then, you know, jumps in the middle of her point. Yeah.
But she, you know, it's so funny because Maria just never ceases to impress me in almost everything she does. It's almost annoying, like, in some ways, like, you must suck at something, like, please. But she, when I listen to her explain situations also, and to, not to just say, like, oh, yeah, that's a great point, or, oh, yeah, that's something I, like, to just say, like, no, I totally disagree with that. This is what I think is going on here. This is what I think it should be. And, yeah, I just really appreciate the way that she comes at hand analysis and the way that her mind works and just her poker game even. She's just aggressive, and I love it. But in this like super soft, pretty body face thing.
Right. I mean, she was working the break desk when playing the main event. She would leave her table 6-7 minutes early or so, walk over to the break desk to join Kara, do the break desk segment, go back to her table. I mean, that's intense. I mean, when you're playing the main event of the World Series of Poker, the biggest poker tournament in the year, and you're also working it at the same time, I mean, major props to Maria. And I mean, you said it, her playing has come a long way as well. She's had a couple of super deep runs this year. I know she won the 25K at the LAPC. I mean, she's just crushing it in all aspects of poker life.
And speaking, so I know that Phil was deep in an event. Did he just bust that event and come do commentary? Was he doing it while he was in the event? Did the event end?
The first day, so like he jumped into the 5K Turbo that he won last year. The 5K with 30-minute levels, that was a 2-day event. And he made the final table once again this year. He finished in 6th for about 95K. He never seemed to really have chips. Of course, he was kind of complaining about, you know, how bad he was running, whereas he got a lot of his chips in with 5-3 against aces and was able to win. But then still felt that he needed to complain a little bit more because that's Phil. But hey, that's very impressive back-to-back runs when everybody's like, oh, Phil's style sucks for turbos, et cetera, et cetera. Well, he won last year's 5K turbo, and he finished 6th this year, so clearly he's doing something right.
Man, it's like, can I say that? He's like herpes. It's like, you think he's gonna just like die off eventually or like let it go or whatever.
Always be around.
He's always doing well enough that you just can't, like, I think people want to be like, he's a joker, like he's not good at poker anymore or whatever, and like he says some of the things he says they just sound so crazy or so antiquated or something, but really it's like he just keeps crushing it. You can't knock it. Like he's just so. Yeah, he's a necessary evil. Yeah.
He had 12 cashes in this World Series of Poker, and he took like a week or a week and a half off to go to the Galapagos Islands with a bunch of famous and rich people and still cashed 12 times. I mean, yeah,
which is so Phil that we all know that too, right? Like...
Right, of course. I feel like none of the group was tweeting pictures or anything of the sort, but Phil's always like, guys, another picture from my Twitter page.
And so he can come back and be like, well, the other day when I was with so-and-so, and we were like on the Galapagos having the trip of a lifetime.
Yeah, sweet.
I'm telling you, he just cracks me up. But yeah, I don't know. I still have to love him. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's gotten me a lot of hits in my life. He's gotten me a lot of views, so.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, we've already been, we've already been talking for way too long. What do we need to talk about? Anything else important before we let everyone go?
No, I don't think so. I think this was it. The World Series wrap up. Thanks to you guys for tuning in each and every day. We've done a lot of podcasts, I feel like, throughout the course of the entire World Series. Thanks to you for getting us greenlit for multiple podcasts a week. That's not the easiest job in the world when you ask for more money, but that's what Sarah does.
For some reason, I just read a whole thing about how podcasting is like the best form of advertising and like the best form of media right now. And, so who knows what anyone else knows, but we know this is where it's at. These are where our people are at. And we appreciate, of course, Global Poker for their sponsoring of the podcast this summer. Global Poker is the home of online poker in America thanks to their massive weekly tournament schedule and the chance to win through their jackpot sit-and-goes. With more than 1 million registered players in the United States, if you are not playing on Global Poker, you are missing out. Head to www.globalpoker.com and set up an account today. I see there's all these other... Bye, you guys. You're not going to miss us. We'll still be here every week.
Still here.
In fact, next week we got a live stream with Tony Burns. Then we'll talk a little bit more about some others. We won't stop. We just probably won't do it as frequently because there's not as much news. Yeah. All right, guys. It's been fun. It's been real. I'll say deuces.